Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Drupal 7 End of Life podcast. I'm Mark Dorson, and I have with me today Chris Free.
How's it going? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world and listening.
We've had a few great episodes so far. We've talked about what life is going to be like after End of Life for Drupal 7. We've talked about some of the options available to people who still have sites on Drupal 7. What else have we talked about, Chris?
We talked about we've got a webinar coming up, but that will happen that'll happen before this episode drops. But we're excited about that. We've been rehearsing for that, and we've got some good content coming on that front. So we talked about that, and we had our hot take episode. Did you touch on that? We had our hot take.
Yep.
And we might be challenged on that today a little bit.
I'm excited for this. So today we have our first interview, and we're talking to Irina Zaks. And Irina is a web developer, an open source evangelist, and last but not least, has a degree in quantum physics. So don't sleep on that. Yeah, exactly. She's been working with Drupal for over 15 years. And most importantly, maybe for our discussion today, she is the co-founder of the Drupal 7 Soft Landing Initiative. So welcome to Irina.
Thank you. Good day, a good time of the day for anyone who is listening, wherever they are in the globe.
Thanks for joining us today.
Irina, to start out, why don't you tell us how the Drupal 7 Soft Landing Initiative what it is and how it came about?
So last December, Drupal Association launched a community initiative, and we call it Soft Landing, Drupal 7 Soft Landing. For over 5 years, we know that Drupal 7 needs to reach its end of life eventually. And the challenge that we see is that people are not moving off Drupal 7. And so Drupal project find itself in the situation where they need to continue support for 500,000 sites that can't, for some reason, move off Drupal 7, despite the fact that we have Drupal 9, 10, 11, and we see this site stuck. And as we look into the details, we can identify a couple of different reasons why people are not moving off, and cost is a big factor. And so we migrated some of our Drupal 7 sites to different systems to Drupal. Some were migrated to Drupal 9, some were migrated to WordPress, some were migrated to Backdrop CMS, fork of Drupal. And by looking at the trends and what was happening during these migrations, we partnered with lots of people in community to share my concerns that cost of moving to Drupal with Composer is prohibitive for smaller organizations that have one site or two sites. And we worked very closely with Drupal Association, with Backdrop CMS, with developers in the community, with site builders, with people who manage content, and came up with initiative. And the goal of the initiative is to help those who are on Drupal 7 that needs to reach end of life, because community cannot keep supporting security. Security updates is the key challenge for Drupal 7 users. If Drupal projects drops support for Drupal 7, that means that security updates are not coming for the software, which makes it unstable in some way. It's not really unstable, but it's, to me, analogy would be Meyer Memorial Library in Stanford. In 2007, there was seismic assessment. The building is there. It's a beautiful building that hosts lots of offices, lots of books, lots of people, lots of things were there. But the cost of required retrofits was higher than the cost of a new library somewhere else on campus. So the decision was made that this library needs to be closed and everything that was in the building was carefully resettled somewhere else. And I believe that that is the right path for Drupal 7 software. It's a great software which provides lots of different options, but before Drupal project can say we're not providing any more security updates, somehow sites that are using it needs to be resettled to different systems that suit their needs. Maybe there are some old sites that don't need to be, just need to peacefully go. There are some sites, very simple sites, that might not need Drupal to be in Drupal ecosystem. But most of Drupal 7 sites have chosen this platform for a reason. So the goal of the initiative is, number one, inform Drupal 7 users of what options are available to them. And number two is help them to get off by providing better tools, by providing better, more options and understanding of how they can resettle in the safe space.
If I might, just to summarize, your position is, and by way of the Drupal 7 soft landing initiative, is that it is no longer feasible, sustainable for the Drupal Association and those that run Drupal.org and the security teams involved. It is no longer sustainable for them to continue supporting Drupal 7 because it is it's not sustainable to continue doing that. It is probably hurting the overall project, and that there are other great places for the Drupal 7 content sites to move to, much like the library that you mentioned at Stanford. So the analogy being that we can move all the great books inside this library over to a new library, and the benefits outweigh the downsides. Now, the downsides in your analogy is that it looked like a beautiful building was no longer going to be used, but it was too expensive to retrofit that library, much cheaper to build a new library. Am I getting that right?
Yes, and the important part of what I believe is that it has to be done in the safe way. We can't just say, okay, we're closing today. We need to make sure that those who are using the system have enough time and tools and support to move off. It is very challenging, but I believe that it's doable.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some of the ideas you have around the tools that the community could create, or the documentation that the community could create to help do that move, or that evacuation, as you once called it, safely. But I would like to just say that as somebody who is actively involved in the Drupal community, who runs a Drupal agency with my partner Mark and our other partner Dave, or at least an agency that's primarily focused on building stuff with Drupal, the Drupal 7 soft landing initiative was news to me. I hadn't heard of it yet. So can you just talk a little bit first about its when it was founded? Is it new, or is it just getting rolling, or when did it get started? And then maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the ideas you have, because I can see some folks that on our team who would be interested in helping build those tools or write that documentation or whatever those things are that you come up with.
Thank you. Yes, it is new. It is new initiative. It took some time. So last year, I was working with Drupal Association as a project manager for GitLab acceleration, with the main goal of providing better tools to Drupal developers at all levels. And it became very clear to me that we need to do something about whole Drupal 7 ecosystem, because it is impacting Drupal community. And sometimes it's a little bit, it's not controversial, but it's a complex situation. We have half of Drupal sites, theoretically, still on Drupal 7. We can't move forward. We have to do a lot of migration issues. Lots of things are involved. We need to keep supporting this wonderful system, but it's getting old, and people really should not be building at this point with Drupal 7. However, People are still building new sites with Drupal 7. So which creates like a lose-lose situation rather than win-win, where we can help these sites to find a new house that is comparable to what they have right now, right? So last year I had a lot of conversation in community. I tried to understand what might be sustainable. Tim Erickson wrote a wonderful article, Soft Landing for Drupal 7 sites, addressing different migration issues related, comparing Backdrop CMS and Drupal with Composer. I'm going to use Drupal with Composer since versions numbers keep changing. And if I say Drupal 9, it's end of life in November. So should I say Drupal 11? It's not very straightforward. So I'm going to use Drupal with Composer and Backdrop CMS fork of Drupal, which is more on the acting. Like Backdrop is where, you're in the theater, you have Backdrop there, and then you go to the music symphony, there's a composer, right? So they're very related, but slightly different. And this article created this word soft landing. So this is why we've chosen it as a name for initiative. And then we did soft launch for soft landing. This is why we didn't heavily advertise. So we're very happy to have an opportunity to spread the news. We started talking about it in January, and then it was presented in Florida camp by Tim Erickson. There was a big presentation, and it will be presented at Mid Camp again, and it will be presented at Stanford Drupal Camp. And I don't know if there's official session at Pittsburgh. I submitted a proposal for soft landing, but I don't think it was accepted. So probably we'll have Bob or something to talk more about details.
Well, I'm here to say there should be an official session accepted. Even if it wasn't accepted, I'm going to put out the call that the association, pull one out of the hat and say, well, this one gets a session, because this is too important. And I think the fact that this started in January and folks like Mark and I only heard about it a week or so ago is proof in the pudding, so to speak, that there's not enough people hearing about this, that there is an initiative out there aimed at helping the community land softly and not crash and burn with their Drupal 7 site. And it is in support of improving the overall Drupal project. I made the comment a couple episodes ago that I think it's potentially detrimental to the overall marketplace presence and understanding of Drupal as a project if there's confusion and fear around what happens with Drupal 7. So I think I said that might be polluting the waters. So I really think that this is important for whichever side you fall on, that you want to continue using Drupal 7, or you're on the security team and you'd really like to see Drupal 7 be sunset and end of life, that you can have your cake and eat it too. That the getting this message out there is really important for the community, because there are ways to land softly, so to speak.
I'm interested to hear more about, the details that we think need to be achieved for this to be successful. One comment that we had on a previous episode was that we were talking about this in such a binary way. I think we were, kind of saying like the only two options are we just keep the end of life date the way it is and suffer the consequences, or we extend it. And I was saying the only thing worse than keeping it would be extending it. But it sounds like you're talking about the soft landing initiative as another option. And, you mentioned the tools and that could be developed, the workflow, the documentation Chris mentioned, but there's been a lot of tools and documentation, certainly to try to get people from Drupal 7 to Drupal with Composer. Is there something that's lacking there that you see, or is it more about giving people a better soft landing towards something like Backdrop?
I would say both. I think I want to address both questions. So one is I 100% agree that taking fear out of this whole it's end of life. End of life is not a exciting situation in general. We have families as our loved people that we really love are getting older. They're getting closer to end of life. And we want to make it peaceful and recognize everything what they have done and celebrate it. There's lots of books that are written about it, and I'm in a position where I'm very happy to have my older generation still here, but I do read a lot of literature about human end of life and trying to make it as possible, as I said, peaceful, and give it something positive. It's never, it can't be like a great thing. When something ends, our culture does not celebrate it. We're not filled with the joy that something is leaving, but acceptance is first step. So if we say we need to accept that Drupal 7 is not the best possible system on the market anymore, it's a tough message for people who say, well, it works great for us. What's the problem? There's a long list of what's the problem. The great news is that Drupal 7 was a terrific system. It has two amazing offsprings. One part that is more enterprise-oriented, people who are more developer mindset, like we need better tools, we need deployments, we need DevOps, we need this, we need 100 million dependencies. We need let's go that direction. But forgotten site builder, I think, was the term used in Portland. Somehow in this transition, site builders seem to be lost, but apparently they are not lost, because the other part of people who were using Drupal 7 said, well, this doesn't work for us. We don't support 100 sites. We support one single site. And for me to convert my site to Drupal 9 and then support it, it's not affordable. And some people like Jen Lampton and Nate, they had this vision very early because they are core developers and they understand impact of technology on the system. And at that time, Backdrop CMS inherited all the great things about Drupal 7, and at the same time added extremely important features like configuration management, which makes all content updates much easier. So there were two major content editor in core, token in core, lots of things, admin toolbar in core, project browser from the very beginning. It's called slightly differently, but it's project browser, which makes it much easier for those who are looking at that part of Drupal 7, more affordable and more accessible. And so we have this now, from my perspective, win-win situation. We have Drupal 7, two lovely offsprings that can help each other and support each other. And we keep contributing to both projects because they're very similar. Like PHP project is not Drupal project, but once in a while there will be a patch, and some people from Drupal project can contribute to PHP project. Some people from PHP project contribute to Drupal, and this is the most important part of open source, where people can support each other in the areas where they can also benefit for their own work, and that makes what makes it sustainable. So that addresses like the big philosophical picture from my side. In order to answer the like extending or not extending, this time we have a plan, right? We have a plan. We're saying, okay, we started this initiative. We need better tools. on the initiative page, there's list of tools that make it a little bit easier to migrate. My personal strong belief is if we can port site audit web UI to Drupal 7, which we don't have right now, it will also lower barrier to beginning migrations, because the first thing that every site owners is facing is like, oh, what do I have on my site? And you have to invest into simply auditing your site. And
so what would the site
have enough
do that are still on Drupal 7? What would that provide to them?
That will eliminate cost for every site, Drupal 7 site owner that wants to migrate the first step of discovery. Because discovery, when people come to me and say, hey, would you migrate this site for me? Okay, we need 20 hours of discovery because I don't know what's on your site. There's lots of different reports that I can run, but it takes time to put them together, right? Site Audit is a great tool, but it doesn't have web UI. So if I want to run Drush that I need to get access to the server, there's lots of things like, okay, I need to access here, access there. If I can ask the owner, can you please put site audit module on and send me the report? I'm like, okay, all right, I can see site has 17 custom modules and it has 3 content types and it has 17 paragraphs, and I don't need to compile different, and this is like the technical information combined with content information that is available in the system, but it takes time to compile it.
And that's something specifically what you're talking about for site audit. That's not quite where it needs to be yet, and you need help with that, right? You're trying to get people to pitch in on that.
Yes, this is where we do our car sales pitch. I would like to introduce to invite everyone who is willing to support Soft Landing Initiative to look at the site audit module. There is a tick issue. There's an issue filed called port UI from Drupal 8 to Drupal 7. I also was thinking of recruiting GPT chat, but I was busy, so I didn't call him. Maybe I will still do it. I'm not sure. But yeah,
Well,
that's one very specific task. For those who are looking at migrating to Drupal 9, but are really can't pay for the cost of migration, I highly recommend looking at the module called Feeds Migrate, which we built 3 years ago and we completely put on hold. This is the module that I did like lots of different presentations that people were very excited about it, but I don't have developers who can concentrate on this task and finish it. Because what this module does, it merges advantages of Feeds module, where you can build migration using web UI, with Migrate, which is inside Drupal core for Drupal with Composer.
Interesting.
So site audit would be number one priority. Feeds Migrate will significantly help people who are moving to Drupal 9.10. And Backdrop CMS has amazing, totally cool module called D2B Migrate, which is exactly what Michael has described when I talked to him about soft landing. He said, oh, what I want to do is I want to put something that says, okay, here are modules that I need, install the modules, import database, save, run upgrade, and we're done. The model exists, it still has some bugs, and developers' help is very much appreciated there.
And just to be clear, that last one that you're talking about, where you say, I want these modules, here's my database, and save, that's to move to Backdrop?
The similar tools exist both on Backdrop and Drupal with Composer. Backdrop is a little, I would say it's easier migration if you have good working clean site. And this is the
Yep.
decision tree that you need to make. If you have a site that doesn't work for you well anymore, you're not looking into like upgrade thing. You're looking at redesigning. You're looking like what's the new system architecture? Things have changed. I need to recreate my site. That's a different story. We're trying to talk to people who are happy with their sites. I think that most people who are staying on Drupal 7 and the majority of use cases that we need to address are people who are happy with their sites, but they can't move from Drupal 7 somewhere else. So if my site has good information architecture, if it works for me, I don't really want to change anything, right? So what I want to do is I want an upgrade, right? And this is where Backdrop is a huge opportunity, because you're not moving things around, you're not changing, you're just upgrading.
Yep.
Your views are there, your content types are there, paragraphs, like everything is there. And migration paths already exist. So you just click, it converts. You need to do theming, you need to do the visuals, because older themes are usually, you usually change your theme 3 to 5 years anyway, right? You have mobile, you have responsiveness, lots of things. But that might be a good solution that is already in place.
Yeah, just to recap some of the things that you talked about there, one thing that really resonated with me was sort of this web UI. I would posit that so many of the couple 100,000 folks that we know about that are still running Drupal 7 sites, some portion of them have sites that are working well for them, and they don't really want to change anything. They don't need a redesign, as you said. They need an upgrade. But I would bet that moving to modern Drupal, or as you call it, Drupal with Composer, is prohibitive in some way, either cost or level of effort or required skill set, et cetera. And having a web UI that would both tell me how many pieces of content I have, what are the content types I have, what are the modules I have, and are there replacements for that in the Backdrop world? Or can I simply run a web migration with the feeds backed module that you talked about? Can I export all my content into a CSV that would be much easier to import into Backdrop or something else? That would make it a lot easier for me to commit to something like that. But right now, for many folks, even though that there are some of these modules out there with varying levels of support, be it experimental or shippable or what have you, I just don't know. I just don't know about them. So I'm wondering if the Backdrop folks, the folks that are running Backdrop, is it Jen Lampton and Nate Haug? Am I saying that right? Are those the folks running Backdrop?
There's a group of people. It's not like one person project or two people project. It's a large project with lots of developers. Sorry?
Yeah. So the group running Backdrop, I would be curious. This is like the biggest opportunity that they've had, and maybe they've been after this and I'm just not aware of it. But there's hundreds of thousands of folks who might be like, just need to know about Backdrop and have an easy solution to get over there. And that would solve a lot of problems for them and for the modern Drupal community that is wishing to sunset Drupal 7 and move on. It seems like a real opportunity for those folks, the Backdrop folks.
Yeah, I believe that this is a win-win situation where everybody gets what they want. So absolutely. And I think you hit it on the nail, that people don't know about it. People are not aware. And this was the first 6 months goals of initiative is soft landing initiative is like, let people know, figure out the way to deliver a message to Drupal 7 owners, to people who are making business decisions. There is an opportunity for you instead of fear. Because right now we're like, it's too scary, let's not talk about it. Instead of that, we want to say, okay, there's something that technology is changing. We have to go through this acceptance phase and say, okay, technology is changing. But it's much easier for people to say, okay, this is proposed paths that you can most likely afford, rather than saying, okay, we don't know anything, like it's end of life. End of life sounds scary. Migration sounds a little more attractive.
I'm wondering too, like if there just needs to be more examples of this in the wild, like somebody demonstrating the actual level of effort to take a relatively simple or a medium-sized Drupal 7 site. One of these sites that you mentioned is working well and is still an active website, and you know, Drupal 7 is providing all that it needs. There needs to be an example of how to do it. There needs to be a guide. There needs to be demonstrations of how easy it is to show a migration, or how you can export your content using feeds or the modules that you're mentioning. There needs to be a little bit of effort put towards just showing and not telling, but showing that you can do it. Because if I were one of these site owners, I'd be wondering, well, who else has done this? Let me see someone else who's like me, who's done it and has done it successfully, whether move to modern Drupal or move to Backdrop or move to WordPress. Somebody show me that how it's been done. Because if I can see that somebody else has done it, I can say, oh, I can do that. But until I can see it, I'm going to be, no, I just want to stay here. And I think it's pretty obvious why that hasn't happened so far, because the Drupal itself has moved on. We've moved to Composer. So the community that would normally be creating that content has sort of forgotten. Most of those people have either gone to Backdrop or gone to something else or left the Drupal community entirely. So it seems like a great opportunity. And Mark, like this is biz dev for us. We should be creating this content because it will show our potential customers who might be running Drupal 7 sites that there is a path here, and it doesn't have to be $500,000. It can be a much smaller investment and get you what you're looking for.
Yeah, and I want to shout out the Backdrop folks. I want to shout out Irina. There's some of this stuff exists, right? Like the Backdrop documentation is there. There's walkthroughs and examples. They exist. So now, are they reaching enough people? Or, you know, are people, I think,
well, I think we're proof in the pudding, right? Like,
well,
I know about Backdrop. I'm in this, but I couldn't tell you all of the people who are building Backdrop. I couldn't even think of their names just a moment ago. So I'm a perfect example of somebody who's in the community, but doesn't know about a lot of the stuff that might help.
Right. And
Yes.
I think then it goes to like, whose responsibility is it too? I think like clearly the Backdrop folks are motivated and want to do that. And I think one of the, you know, sort of issues here is that the people who are working in Drupal core, you know, they have gone where their attention has taken them. It's taken them to Drupal with Composer and the more modern versions of Drupal. And, you know, this is the whole reason why we're here. This is the whole reason why we're talking about end of life and why the current Drupal community needs to end of life Drupal 7, because it does take an outsized amount of support and attention for those things. But I'm interested to bigger picture. One thing that I found really interesting, Irina, in reading some of the things that you've written is sort of broke my brain a little bit at first, because we're used to thinking of Backdrop as a fork of Drupal 7. That, you know, I think that's pretty common and sort of accepted terminology. But you also talk about, you know, Drupal with Composer, Drupal 8, 9, and 10 as a fork of Drupal. These are both forks of Drupal 7, both Drupal 8, 9, and 10, and Backdrop. So, and that sort of made me like look at it in a new way. And I found that fascinating, and I agree. So I'm curious, you know, are there, beyond the work that, you know, we've spoken about tutorials, tools, documentation, are there changes at the organization level that would be helpful to these 400,000 sites that are still in Drupal 7 in keeping them content and supported? And like, what can be done by the Drupal community at large that isn't, you know, well, we're going to keep committing code to the Drupal 7 branch, but, you know, what else can be done?
I think that at this time, talking about opportunities is the most important part. I think that at this time, information is most helpful, because once people start realizing that they have options, they will start looking at the options. Like Chris was like, oh, I think you made a very good example. Like, I'm part of Drupal community, but never saw these demos. I never saw these tools. Well, the Backdrop Live was, I believe, 3 weeks ago, and I did a demo of how I migrate the site live demo, which can break sometimes, but even if it breaks, you see what problems people face. There is an issue filed under Drupal 7 soft landing. There is a Drupal 7 soft landing project that Tim Erickson opened, and I think Tim Erickson would be great person to talk on your next episode. Jen Lampton will be a great person to talk. There are many other people in community that you might want to talk to, and they will tell you their reasoning for building with this software, what works great, where help is needed from the development perspective as well. But there's a lot of events that are happening, and I think that this is great that community is able to figure out their paths in the situation that is not quite clear. It was very inspiring when I talked to Mark last week, right? We talked. It's like, oh,
yeah,
people that work with it's very hard when we start using this label advanced, modern. It's doesn't feel right. We are respectful to, like,
it's a bit unfair to call it modern Drupal.
Yeah, you have to have right tool for the job, right?
Yep.
And that is the biggest thing that I'm trying to promote. You need to find the right tool for the job. I am web developer. My goal is I'm developing web applications for research and academia. I believe in education. I believe in research. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. I am not Drupal developer. I'm not WordPress developer. I am not backdrop developer. I am a web developer. I'm developing web applications. I work with different applications. I work with WordPress. I work with backdrop. I work with Drupal. Some people would call me developer. Other people will call me site builder. Some people would call me project manager. I have different, hats, different roles. But my message is there is tool for the job. We just need to tell people about it, help them understand it, help them use it. And then at the end of the day, we will have better systems, and we also will have an opportunity to preserve community, because Drupal community is one of the best places that I worked in my entire life. And then this is why people keep coming. And whether we call it Drupal, backdrop, like, it's hard for me to say, oh no, I'm not this and I'm not that, right?
Yep.
Right.
Like, children are different from their parents. They inherit, but they're not the same people. So having your last name, do you want to have your father's last name, your mother's last name, or both? How do you want to manage? This is things that I can't speak about because I'm not doing anthropology research. I'm just a web developer and open source evangelist.
Well, and quantum physicist.
There's so many different constituencies, and it's what is the Drupal community, right? And what is the backdrop community? And, you could be a member of both communities. And so when we're talking about community support being dropped for Drupal 7, the people, we're all in some way involved in those decisions. Our voices matter in shaping those decisions. But there are people who are more involved. And, people always talk about Drupal as a duocracy, but we've got lots of dedicated folks on the security team on both of those projects, on Drupal and on the backdrop side. The leaders of those, of the backdrop organization, the Drupal Association on the Drupal side, a lot of it is the money that is spent by the Drupal Association to keep up the infrastructure and all of those things. So, should there be more collaboration between those two communities? One thing that I keep thinking about is, we've spoken, Chris and I, a lot about what's going to change when Drupal 7 reaches end of life. No security team, no trusted releases, all of these things. And then when you look at Backdrop, those things exist there. security team, continued releases, fixes, all of these things, and they have a plan to continue that. Why should we not work more closely together? We meaning the Drupal community and the Backdrop community, for these 400,000 sites. I know the Backdrop community is doing everything they can on their own, but is there an opportunity for closer collaboration?
Absolutely, yes. Collaboration is the key. Collaboration is foundation of why Drupal project became what it is. It's people supporting what works for them. And somehow what works for them works for other people as well. It's not like everyone is pulling to their side. It's like we're collaborating, contributing, and we're all together pulling this big load. And that makes our life easier, not the other way around. And it's very difficult to separate Backdrop community from Drupal community, because I would say that almost everyone who, maybe not everyone, but most people work in both systems because the systems are so close.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I'm wondering two things out loud here. I'm wondering if at this point in time, if the Drupal Association and Dries might say that our best path for these 400,000 sites is to bring Backdrop back in as a fully supported and recommended next path for Drupal 7. The other thing I'm wondering is, if given a time machine, if we went back to right before Backdrop became the first and most profound fork of Drupal, could we have said, instead of there being Drupal and then some other thing that continues the Drupal 7 trajectory, could we have two Drupal products? Could we have Drupal for, I'm not sure of the naming that I would say, but could there have been two products like Drupal and Drupal Enterprise? And could those have lived on simultaneously? And could we be now in this moment in it having a very different conversation that there's two Drupals? There's there's base Drupal or Drupal starter, and then there's Drupal Enterprise. And you know, if you want to be on Drupal Enterprise, like, you have the reasons. But if you're just getting started and you want to kick the tires with this product, and I'm just thinking of all the benefits that would have given, sort of like, could Views have become Views that lives in two products and provide the same power that Views does to both products? And could there have been less effort and more value created in the marketplace by having two versions of Drupal versus some fork that I don't think has gotten its just due? Obviously, I haven't paid enough attention to it. I'm learning a ton about it in these last few weeks. And then Drupal Enterprise could have carried on and become what it is today, or something greater. I'm not sure. So wondering about those two things. What does that shake loose in both your minds?
I will probably quote one of my favorite stories and also movies. It's called Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass. There's a wonderful scene where she says, well, you can't change the past, but you can learn from it. So that's the direction that I would like to go. And so I think that we need to learn from the past, pick up good lessons, figure out what can be done better. And when we are looking through our, when we're doing analysis of the projects and we're saying this went well, this didn't go so well, we're not doing it to blame anyone. The goal is to say, what can we do better next time when we're in the similar situation? So the goal is learning. The goal is not, oh, this is bad, that is bad. So if we can look at the situation right now and say, what are best options moving forward? That's what I would like to see happening. And finding good ways of collaboration would be my ideal scenario.
Yeah, I think it would be hard for me to imagine that, going back in that time machine and anyone involved thinking, oh, there's still going to be 400,000 sites on Drupal 7 in 2023. That doesn't seem likely. So given that, I have a lot of empathy for the people and their decision making, the people involved in their decision making at the time. But I agree with you, Irina. I think that now we are where we are. So what's the best decision that we can make going forward? Sunk costs are gone. Those we've made all those decisions. We are where we are. And I think that this is a really unique situation given that, Backdrop does exist. They have these infrastructure pieces in place. We're not sitting here thinking about a potential project that maybe that we're starting now to say, oh, what if somebody external to Drupal, quote unquote, kept up the Drupal 7 code base, kept a security team. It's not a theoretical thing. It already exists now. So it's really a question of, the organizational aspects of it. How are we talking about it? How are we positioning about it? How does the Drupal community as a whole, is it part of the Drupal community or is it a separate community? And there, I'm sure the Backdrop folks have a lot to say about this too. I don't know what they think is a good idea or a bad idea. But thinking from the perspective of some of the people that are responsible for these some 400,000 Drupal 7 sites, it seems like there could certainly be some opportunities here to do a better job of, from a realistic perspective, to support them going forward. And I think that doesn't mean necessarily the Drupal community as we consider it now supports Drupal 7 forever, right? So none of us are saying that. But I think that we're getting creative here and thinking about okay, well, within where we are now, how could we do a better job for these 400,000 folks? And I think that's a great thing.
Absolutely. Yep. I think that we are in a very good, naturally developed situation. And I'm very much looking forward to more conversations. I want to thank you so much for doing this, starting the Drupal 7 End of Life podcast. And my personal thank you for inviting me to talk about my ideas and about initiative that we started with Backdrop and Drupal Association together. And looking forward to more conversation here at Batcamp, at Midcamp, all the camps around in smaller groups all over the world, Australia, maybe.
Yep,
see
that's
you in
a
Melbourne,
great
see
note.
you in Vienna, see you all over the place.
I will be at Midcamp. Irina will be at Midcamp. So find us there. And we're looking forward to talking to folks about this topic. Irina, if people are looking to help out, pitch in with the Soft Landing Initiative, what can they do? Where can they go?
There is a page on Drupal.org. It says Community Initiative, Drupal 7 Soft Landing. If you go search it on Google or Bing or any other search engines that are used around the world, it will most likely point you to the starting page, and you will include link in the list of links for everyone who wants to click, not to listen. But yeah, search Drupal 7 Soft Landing End of Life.
And we will also include that in the show notes. So that'll be, if you look in your show notes, that'll be there for you, among a bunch of other links on topics that we talked about on this show. Chris, what else you got?
I don't know. I feel like we got to make some stickers for Midcamp so we can give out some Drupal 7 End of Life podcast stickers. The album art that we whipped up in 8 minutes and actually turned out pretty good.
That, please.
I can get on that. I'll get on that. I'll try to find a decent printer and we'll get those printed in time. And I just want to thank you, Irina, for coming on the show. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. And I will send you a little tiny icon that we did with a parachute and Drupal 7 icon. So if there are better designers, then okay, I'll put it in the email right now.
Great.
All right, I'll give you 8 minutes of my design time.
Terrific.